So the tactic seems to be ganging up on one ant and ripping it limb from limb. A few weeks ago, I went outside my front door to discover that there were ants swarming. In fact, there were 2 colonies and they were warring. So I logically took out my camera and started recording them. But while I was watching this process unfold, I got to wondering, how exactly do the ants know when to swarm and how do they tell each other? I knew that it had something to do with pheromones, that is, some sort of scent that they released, but I didn't really understand any of the details. So after delving into the literature, I found out it's complicated, and it varies from species to species of ant. Loosely speaking, this is what I learned. Let's start with foraging signals. When a worker ant finds some food source, it will take up as much as it can and then return to the nest, usually leaving some sort of scent trail along the way. Once back at the nest, the ant will perform some kind of a social ritual. Let's just say it holds up a sign. Now this sign is an invitation to join up for a little food run. When passing ants see this sign, they join the first. The first ant will keep holding up its sign, that is, it will keep recruiting ants in proportion to the quantity of the food available. In other words, more food, more ants. Once enough ants have collected, they will perform a tandem run. That is, the ants will walk a few steps, then wait for the others in the group to catch up, all the time physically tapping each other to stay as a team. But what about a swarm, where there are literally thousands of ants all moving together at the same time? Well, it starts almost the same way, except that when the ant holds up its sign, it's a much more powerful signal. Then when the ants join up, instead of just hanging around, they start signaling too. Now, a balancing act happens. Some ants in the colony are now in work mode, while other ants are now in swarm mode. When an ant in work mode encounters a few, let's just say it's 3 ants in a swarm mode, it switches to swarm mode. While if an ant in swarm mode encounters, say, 5 working ants, it switches back to work mode. Pretty soon, a lot of the ants are ready to swarm, but they don't just run out in random directions when they come out of the colony, they perform a tandem run again, consistently checking that they are still swarming together, because their strength is in numbers. Back to the ants that were outside my front door. As I was watching the battle unfold, I had an idea.
I'm gonna try something. This wasn't originally what I was gonna try, but since they're warring, I'm gonna see if I can make like a demilitarized zone, like a line where they don't cross. Cinnamon comes from the bark of the cinnamon tree, which is a tropical plant, which evolved its spicy character so that ants wouldn't eat it. One of the things that happens with cinnamon is it interferes with the chemical signals that the ants use. So what I'm going to try to do is make a zone where the warring ants can't war anymore. I'm going to make just kind of a path they can't cross. I want to stop that battle, but let it work itself out. Alright, put a lot in the crack there. Alrighty. Now, ants aren't going to be able to see past that spot. You see now they can't, they're going around, or trying to. Ooh. Alright, just because I'm weird. Let's see what happens if I block them in. I don't want to put it on them, but I want to like maybe... No more reinforcements, guys. No more reinforcements. There. You're trapped now. Notice that there's no ants on the cinnamon. They can't just like walk on it. It's like it's like, I don't know, like the ground just disappears for them, or maybe it's like walking into a lot of like fog or slightly poisonous gas, like tear gas. Maybe it's like tear gas.
Well, actually, past self, it's a little bit more intense than that. There are actually active chemicals in the cinnamon, like cinnamaldehyde and cinnamic alcohol, which are toxic to the ants. How toxic? Well, that depends on the species, but for the sidewalk ants and the carpenter ants, which you'll see a little bit later on, it seems to have a pretty powerful effect.
So, an ant shouldn't do the cinnamon challenge. It would be bad. This little group that I encircled, they aren't fighting anymore. They're all devoted to just trying to figure their way out, and they're ignoring one another, where previously they were fighting. This one swarmed again and then kind of hit the barrier and is stuck. These ones have stopped warring entirely because I think the cinnamon just confused them to the point where they don't even recognize who is who. And they all have a little bit of cinnamon on them, and it's just completely blocking their senses.
But playing with all of the cinnamon gave me another idea about spices in general, an idea that I could test.
I wanted to try out whether or not other spices would have the same effect. Because one of the hypotheses that I have is that other spices will have a similar effect in terms of deterring ants, because the reason that the plants evolved those other those chemicals that we like and find flavorful are actually to deter insects or other creatures. So I came up here to my parents' house, and there happened to be up in the mountains, there's a ant hill. Here's another ant hill over here. So what I have set up is, here's some little spice piles. This one's ginger, this one's garlic, and this one's cinnamon. They're completely not even walking on the cinnamon. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put some sugar in the middle of them, and I'm also going to put a little sugar that's not surrounded by any, and then see if they find it. So I moved it over into the shade, into where more of the ants were walking back and forth. I don't know if you can see any. So they're more likely to encounter it. I also wetted it down. Part of what ants harvest is the moisture. Finally got some to be walking on here, and it seems that they found the sugar. At least a couple of them have. Just the plain sugar, the control. But the other piles they haven't found on. They walk on the garlic a lot, I've noticed. Okay, so those first couple ants, they got on here, they found the sugar, they crawled right in the middle, and then they started flailing about, and now they're dead. I don't know why. I don't think there's anything wrong with the sugar. Maybe they got too hot? I don't know. I don't know what's going on, as usual. Alright, well there's definitely a preference for the plain sugar here. They're starting to find it regularly. And I've been watching and counting the number of ants that come to the sugar and actually harvest it. I don't count it if they just walk over, but if they actually take some up. I've counted in the last 15 minutes, there have been about 8 that have harvested from the sugar and about 3 that have harvested from this garlic one here. The garlic, I think, is not as much of a deterrent. One went onto the ginger, but only one, and none of them have managed to cross the cinnamon barrier whatsoever. They come up and they just stop right at the edge. They don't even try to walk through it. Every once in a while one will walk across the ginger, but they don't seem to notice the sugar that's here. Like that one just came up. And then they do seem to be all right with the garlic, but not as much. They don't like it quite as much as the plain sugar, because even though the sugar in the middle is still just as good as any of them, they're just not going to it because they get inhibited by the garlic itself. Though they kind of, every once in a while, they like smell the garlic. So I'm about finished here. I picked it up, I shook all the ants off, and they did come to the plain sugar a lot more than they did the other ones. Now they occasionally would walk over the garlic and the ginger. They didn't come back to the ginger, it seemed like. They would just randomly walk on across it. The garlic they did come back to periodically. It seemed to bother them less. They would walk on it without any hesitation, and they would harvest some of the sugar occasionally. But it was about half as frequent as the plain sugar by itself, and they wouldn't even walk on the cinnamon. The cinnamon is evolved from the tropical cinnamon tree to deter leafcutter ants. They can completely decimate a tree in a matter of hours. So it's probably reasonable to think that that's the strongest deterrent here. Whereas garlic and ginger have maybe less of an environmental pressure to resist being eaten by insects.
So I'm pretty convinced by all of this, although I did find some conflicting sources as I was researching this on the internet, particularly about the nature of how powerful cinnamon is. However, since the toxicity of the cinnamon does vary from species to species, and the actual active chemicals of the cinnamon are volatile, that means they'll evaporate quickly. If the cinnamon is very old, the effect will be diminished. But as always, if you want to learn more, you can click the link to my blog post below where I detail the steps that were taken to perform these experiments and all of the detailed information that I actually collected. But you don't have to take my word for it because you can science it.